I watched Trump's roundtable on bailing out the farmers again today, so you don't have to, and here's my overview. They collectively spoke for about an hour. Trump mentioned Biden 9 times and Obama 7 times, and other people also mentioned Biden, and I'll talk about that when we get to their notes. Trump starts off right at the beginning saying that in 3 states, gas is $1.99. Now, AAA tracks national gas prices as well as by state what the average is, and the lowest in any state is $2.36 in Oklahoma, and the national average is down below $3, but he has done nothing to cause that. He rants for like 3 to 5 minutes about how affordability is a Democrat hoax, and then he says that we're bringing in hundreds of billions of dollars in tariffs, which I only bring up because last week he said it was trillions of dollars in tariffs, and we're also not bringing it in. That is your money. A tariff is a tax on an imported good that is paid by the importer and then passed down to the consumer, aka you. You are paying money, and he is giving that money to farmers. I forgot to give you a craziest thing for this speech, but I think there is one. At one point, he asks a random rice farmer that he brought in what countries are dumping their rice in the United States, and then has Scott Bessent write down the countries that she says, and then says, we're just going to fix that immediately because they're illegally shipping in rice, whatever that means. Okay, he said the big beautiful bill is strongly in benefit of farmers, which is why he has to give them $12 billion. He doesn't explain that. And then he goes on the weird rant again about how if you love your kids, you can leave them your farm now with this death tax taken out. But a bunch of farmers were killing themselves, and now he had to do all this. But if you don't love your children, it doesn't matter. You can just forget about everything he's saying. Next up is Brooke Rollins, who intentionally does not say Biden's name, but says the previous administration a bunch of times, and then blames everything that's happening with farmers on Biden and says it was a result of his DEI policy and his climate change policy that farmers were screwed under Biden. Oh yeah, and then she says that it's $11 billion, and then Trump interrupts her because he has to be right about everything and says, no, it's $12 billion. And she, like a mother talking to a petulant child, goes, actually, it's only $11 billion guaranteed right now. The additional billion is going to be for something else. And Trump is just like, okay, whatever. He has no idea what's going on. Then Trump says that he's going to take all of the environmental additives, he calls them, on tractors. Basically, he's saying anything that makes them environmentally friendly, he's going to take off because he has to buy himself a lot of farm equipment to maintain all of the grounds on his golf courses and things like that. That's the reason he gives, to save himself money. He's going to make your pollution greater. And then he also says that in order to start a lawnmower, literally he says this, you need 185 IQ and you need a PhD. This is a different thing. He says you need a PhD from MIT in order to fix a tractor. That's what he claims. Next up is Scott Bessent. He mentions Biden once. Now, I don't have anything to say about what he said because it was so boring and uninformative that Donald Trump was falling asleep while he was praising him. Then right after Bessent goes, Trump says that we need to speed this up and go fast because the last time we had one of these meetings, it took over 3 hours, and we're super transparent because we're willing to sit here and take these questions for a long time. So why don't you next people go fast, and then we'll take some questions from the fake news. Next up is Representative Austin Scott from Georgia. He mentions Biden 5 times in just a couple minutes, and then he says something about how eggs are correlated to the vaccines that are being given and that Brooke Rollins allowed them to take whatever vaccines they want because of eggs. I swear to God, this is what he said. I have no idea what he's talking about. And then he says that the EU is regulating what we can do on our farms. And by that, what he actually means is the EU isn't willing to buy timber from us when we just gut forests in order to make farmland because it's not environmentally sustainable, and says that that needs to be changed because we can't have the EU regulating what we do, which is not what they're doing. And then he just says a country that can't feed itself doesn't know freedom, which I don't know what that means when we're talking about exporting soybeans to China, but whatever. Then Trump gets up and says, with tariffs, we're now the richest country in the world. We've been the richest country in the world for decades. Like, there is no questioning that, and tariffs had absolutely nothing to do with it. And then he calls other countries sleazebags, just out of nowhere, and no specific country just calls them sleazebags. And then he calls on Austin Scott again. You might remember that was the person who just spoke. And then he starts bitching about eggs before letting him answer. Then you get 2 random farmers who he brought in to speak. Now, one of them is going to be the rice farmer who he's just going to take her word for what countries he needs to sanction further. But another one says that his 2-year-old doesn't want Santa to come to the house. They want President Trump to come to the house. I don't care how involved in politics you are. Your 2-year-old should know nothing about any politicians because these people are not to be idolized. They work for us. He also says that despite the fact that his father and his best field hand got killed in a farming accident, he wants nothing more than for his children to farm. He doesn't want them to get like degrees or become doctors or anything like that. He wants them to farm, despite the fact that his father was killed in a farming accident along with his best farmhand. Oh, and then that farmer starts talking about E15, like ethanol for gasoline. And Trump is like, is that important? And the guy's like, yeah, it's important. And Trump is like, awesome. We're going to make sure that that's working. He didn't know about it. Next up is that one, the rice farmer, who, again, she starts saying that countries are pumping rice into our country. And Trump literally asks her what countries. And then later we'll say that they're illegally putting rice into our country. And then later, literally, we'll have Scott Bessent. He will say, write these countries down that she's going to tell me, and has her list the countries again. I swear to God, no one in this administration has any idea what's going on, or at least Trump doesn't think that they do. Now we get to the questions. A reporter asked him, hey, do you think that the price is coming down, which you keep promising, happening by midterms will have an effect on the midterms? And he says, prices are already down. We've gotten inflation under control. You don't want deflation, but prices are down. So he does not know the definition of the word deflation. He does not know the definition of the word inflation. And because he's never shopped for himself ever, he does not know that prices are, in fact, not down. Brooke Rollins will then say that healthy food initiatives are just fraud by SNAP. Doesn't go on to explain that, just says that they are. Then Donald Trump will say that January 6th was a Democrat hoax. He will also say that 2020 was rigged during this, so he's just hitting all the good points. A reporter says, hey, you said you would release the whole second strike video, which I watched him say. He did say that he would do that. That happened on September 2nd. You know, the war crime that happened that wasn't actually a war crime because we're not at war. And he says, I never said that. You said that. And she goes, well, actually, you did say that. And he's like, I didn't say that. You said that. And then he says, you are the most obnoxious reporter in this whole place. You are an obnoxious and terrible reporter. And then he gets asked a question about Republicans who are going to be retiring at the end of this, and immediately gets super defensive and is like, why don't you ask about how many Democrats are retiring? How many Democrats are retiring? Refuses to answer the question, and then says that the reporter is ill-informed and not prepared because they didn't know how many Democrats were retiring. And the reporter says, well, the question that I had for you was about your party, the Republican Party, and that's why I had the numbers on that. And he goes, no, you weren't prepared, and then just moves on. He gets asked, hey, a bunch of fertilizer comes from Canada and we can't just make all of that here just willy-nilly. So what are you going to do to reduce prices for farmers from the fertilizer that's coming in from Canada? And he says, we're going to raise the tariffs, because he doesn't know how any of this works. He does admit that we can't grow everything here, which is true because there are specific weather conditions that are necessary to do certain farming and agricultural products, but doesn't say that we're going to do anything like reduce tariffs on these things that obviously we can't produce here. Instead, he's just going to keep adding tariffs. He keeps talking about adding tariffs, and now the Supreme Court needs to let him keep adding tariffs, and how he needs to be able to do it quickly so that he can get all of the benefits of charging you more money. Oh, he also said Biden hates the farmers and he loves the farmers. And then he says, we have a great situation in Ukraine. The only issue is a bunch of people keep dying. When asked, what's your Christmas wish for the country? He says, my wish is that we'll make America great again. And also we brought in $18 trillion. So I'm just going to keep doing the same shit. That's my wish for America for Christmas. He gets asked, what are you going to do about the subsidies ending with Obamacare and the price of insurance going up a bunch? And he says, the whole thing is a Democrat hoax because all insurance companies are owned by Democrats, and Obamacare, this is a direct claim that he makes, Obamacare was set up by Democrats in order to make insurance companies money. That is what he is claiming now. And he says that he's not going to do anything about it. He just wants to see the money back in the hands of the people and they can buy their own healthcare, which is exactly what we were at before Obamacare, which he has refused to come up with another solution other than just doing what we did before, which led to people with pre-existing conditions being denied healthcare. But, you know, whatever. His plan after 10 years is, I don't know. He said when they do vaccines for babies, they just put 88 of them into one big ass thing of fluid and then just shove it into the baby. I swear to God, that's how he thinks it works. He also at one point just says that he never spoke with Jared Kushner, you know, his son-in-law, who's been an instrumental part of both of his administrations. He apparently never spoke with him. I think he's special envoy to something too. And he's just a senior advisor at the White House. Why would Trump ever talk to his son-in-law, who happens to be a Nepo baby senior advisor at the White House? He also says that if you put George Washington and Abraham Lincoln up to be U.S. attorneys in Virginia and New Jersey, that they would be rejected. Doesn't give a reason for that, probably because they're dead. It's been a while, but I have a couple of people to thank. This person says, thank you for all you do for us. Hope this is a welcome break from the garbage you listen to in order to help keep us informed. From Sarah N. They sent me a game, Jaipur. And then this person says, thank you for all you do. Love your TikToks. From Becky C. They sent me a book, A Confederacy of Dunces, and a medal holder for like races. You know, you get medals at the end of them. I do have a bit of an obsession with authors who later go on to kill themselves. So thanks again for this. I will add it to my collection of these types of books.